My name is Lisa. I've always been a daddy's girl. It was just the two of us against the world, a team that nothing could break. After my mom died, everything changed. Our home, once filled with laughter, became silent and cold. It felt like the light had gone out, leaving me in the dark with nothing but grief. And then my dad told me he was getting married again. My heart clenched. His fiancée, Anna, was beautiful, confident, too perfect. It felt like she was stepping into my mother's place, erasing her from our lives. I hated it. Living together was a nightmare. Every word she said, every glance she threw my way irritated me. I saw her as a stranger invading my family, trying to take my father away. One evening, after yet another fight, I stormed off to my room and slammed the door. I wanted to be alone, to drown in my anger. But then, a soft knock. "Lisa, can I come in?" It was Anna. I expected another argument, but instead, she simply sat down on my bed and spoke softly. "I don't want us to be enemies," she said. "Can we try to understand each other?" I didn't know what to say, but as she talked, I saw something in her eyes, something I had never noticed before. Pain, loneliness. She told me about her fears, about how hard it had been for her too, about the people she had lost. I listened, and suddenly I realized we were both just trying to survive. We were both alone. From that night on, something shifted between us. We spoke differently, still cautious, still hesitant. But I started seeing her in a new way, not just as my father's wife, but as someone who brought warmth back into our home. And then, something even stranger happened. I started noticing her more, the way she laughed, the way her voice filled the silence, the way my heart beat faster when her fingers brushed mine at the dinner table. I didn't understand what was happening to me, and it terrified me. I told myself it was nothing. I was just confused, overwhelmed by everything happening in my life. It wasn't real. It couldn't be. But then it happened again. One evening, we were sitting on the couch watching a movie. My dad had already gone to bed, leaving just the two of us in the dimly lit room. At some point, she shifted, and her knee pressed against mine. She didn't move away. Neither did I. I felt my whole body tense, my heart pounding so hard I thought she might hear it. She must have noticed something in the way I sat stiffly because, after a long moment, she spoke without taking her eyes off the screen. "You've been acting strange lately." My throat went dry. "So have you," I shot back. She smiled just slightly. "Oh? How?" I had no answer. It was a game now, a dangerous one, and I didn't know who would win. The next day, I told myself I had to stop. This was crazy. It was all in my head. I just missed my mom. I just felt lost. I just needed to move on. So I went out with friends, laughed, talked, pretended everything was normal. For a few hours, it even worked. But when I came home and saw Anna sitting at the kitchen table, reading a book, my heart skipped a beat. She looked up at me. "How was your day?" "Good," I answered too quickly, turning away before she could see the truth in my face. She smiled. "I'm glad." I hesitated. Something about her tone made me stop in my tracks. "Lisa," she said softly. I turned back. She was watching me carefully. "You know this isn't just in your head, don't you?" A shiver ran down my spine. "I don't know what you're talking about," I muttered. Anna closed her book and stood up. "Yes, you do." She took a step closer, stopping just inches away from me. I held my breath. "If you tell me to stop, I will," she whispered. "If you say you don't want this, I'll forget it ever happened." I couldn't speak. My mind screamed, "Say no, this is wrong, this is dangerous." But my lips stayed shut. And then, gently, carefully, she reached out and touched my hand. "Say no, Lisa," she whispered. But I didn't. And instead of stepping back, I stepped forward. I closed the distance between us. Anna's eyes searched mine, waiting for hesitation, waiting for me to stop this. I didn't. I wasn't even sure I could. "Are you sure?" she asked, her voice barely audible. I wasn't sure about anything. Except this. Instead of answering, I lifted my hand and rested it on her wrist. Her skin was warm, and the touch sent a jolt through me. Anna inhaled sharply. "This will make everything more complicated," she murmured. "Isn't it already?" I whispered back. She exhaled slowly, closing her eyes for a brief second, as if accepting the inevitable. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then suddenly, she took a step back. "No," she said firmly, shaking her head. I blinked, stunned. "Why?" I asked. She hesitated before answering. "Because I'm afraid I won't be able to stop." I felt something inside me shatter. We stood there, staring at each other, both knowing what had just happened, both knowing that there was no turning back now. After that night, everything changed. We avoided each other, or at least, we tried. Anna went back to her usual routine, acting as if nothing had happened. She still cooked breakfast, still laughed with my father, still smiled when appropriate, but I could feel the tension in every glance, in every accidental touch. I told myself I was imagining it, that it was nothing. Until one evening, I walked into the kitchen and saw her standing there alone. She didn't turn around right away. I froze in the doorway. "Good morning," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. She slowly turned her head and met my gaze. There was so much conflict in her eyes. "Good morning, Lisa." We stood there, looking at each other for too long, too intensely. I knew that if I took one more step toward her, it would all happen again. "I can't do this," I whispered. Anna swallowed hard. "Neither can I." "Then what do we do?" She didn't answer. And then, she took a step closer. I didn't move. She reached for my hand. I didn't pull away, and the next thing I knew, her lips were on mine, soft, hesitant, but real. I didn't stop her, because I didn't want to, and there was no turning back. It happened a few more times. Never planned, never spoken about, just moments. Like the time we passed each other in the hallway and her fingers brushed my wrist. A touch so light I could have imagined it, but I knew I hadn't. I had felt the warmth, the deliberate hesitation before she pulled away. Or the time we were alone in the living room and she leaned over to grab the remote, her shoulder pressing against mine. I could feel the heat radiating from her body, the way her breath hitched for a second before she quickly moved away, pretending nothing had happened. But something had, and we both knew it. Every interaction felt like a test. Who would break first? Who would cross the line that was already so blurred? I told myself I could stop any time. I told myself I wouldn't let it go further, but then, one evening, it did. It was late. My dad had already gone to bed, and I was in the kitchen, staring at the empty mug in my hands, lost in thought. I didn't even hear her come in. "Can't sleep?" I jumped slightly, my grip tightening on the mug. Anna was standing in the doorway wearing a loose t-shirt and pajama pants. Her hair was a little messy and she looked softer, more relaxed, more dangerous. I shrugged. "Something like that." She stepped closer, opening the fridge, pretending to search for something. I knew she wasn't looking for food. We were both just avoiding the inevitable. The tension was thick. She pulled out a bottle of water, took a slow sip, then turned to face me, leaning against the counter. "I've been thinking," she said carefully, watching me. I swallowed. "About what?" She hesitated, then sighed. "About you. About us." My heart stopped. She was acknowledging it. We had never spoken about it, never admitted out loud that something was happening between us. And now, there it was, hanging in the air between us, too heavy to ignore. I put the mug down, my fingers gripping the edge of the counter. "What about us?" My voice came out quieter than I intended. Anna tilted her head slightly, studying me. "You know what?" I let out a breath, shaking my head. "I don't." "You do," she interrupted gently. Silence. The air felt charged. Her eyes searched mine, waiting for something. Permission, denial, anything. I could have walked away. I could have laughed it off, pretended like it was all in my head, but I didn't. Instead, I took a step forward. Anna didn't move. Another step. Her breathing changed. I was close enough now that I could see the way her chest rose and fell, the way her fingers curled slightly as if resisting the urge to reach for me. She was waiting for me to make the choice. I could still walk away. I should walk away. But then, without thinking, I reached out. My fingertips brushed against hers. She exhaled sharply. Then slowly, she turned her hand, lacing her fingers with mine. That was all it took. That single touch broke whatever restraint was left between us. In the next breath, she pulled me forward, and our lips met. It wasn't rushed, it wasn't desperate, it was soft, careful, like we were both afraid of shattering the moment. Her hands found my waist, pulling me against her, and I melted into her warmth. I didn't think about right or wrong, I didn't think about consequences, I just thought about her. And in that moment, nothing else mattered. We didn't talk about it the next day, or the day after that. But it kept happening. Late at night, when the house was quiet, soft whispers, stolen touches. It was dangerous. It was reckless. But I didn't want to stop, and neither did she. One evening, we were in the backyard. My dad had gone out with friends, and the night air was warm. I sat on the wooden steps, sipping my drink, trying to ignore the way she sat just a little too close. "You leave soon," she said after a while. I nodded, staring at the stars. "Are you excited?" I shrugged. "I guess." Anna sighed, setting her glass down. "You'll do amazing things, Lisa." I glanced at her. "You sound like you're saying goodbye." She gave me a sad smile. "Aren't we?" My throat tightened. I didn't want to think about it. Didn't want to think about how this, whatever it was, would disappear the second I left. I turned toward her, searching for something in her expression. "What if I don't want to say goodbye?" I whispered. Anna looked at me for a long time, something unreadable in her eyes. Then softly, she reached up and tucked a strand of hair behind my ear. Her fingers lingered for a second longer than necessary. "You have to," she murmured. I wanted to protest, but deep down, I knew she was right. The day I left for university, my dad was beaming. He loaded my bags into the car, triple-checked everything, making dad jokes about not forgetting my toothbrush. Anna stood nearby, smiling politely, but I could see the tension in her shoulders. When it was time to go, she finally stepped forward. "You'll be great," she said. I forced a smile, thanks. For a second, we just stood there. Then she lowered her voice. "Will you write to me?" I hesitated. "Do you want me to?" Anna gave a small, uncertain smile. "I don't know." "Then I don't know either." My dad called from the driver's seat. "Lisa, let's go." Anna's expression didn't change, but I could feel the weight of the moment between us. "Goodbye, Lisa," she said softly. I didn't answer. I turned and got into the car. I didn't look back. I knew that if I did, it would hurt too much. University swallowed me up. Classes, new friends, a new life. It wasn't long before everything that happened at home felt like a dream. Something distant. Something that had happened to someone else. I never wrote to Anna. She never wrote to me. Sometimes, late at night, I'd think about those moments, her touch, her whispers, the way she looked at me like I was something fragile and precious. But those thoughts never lasted long, because I had moved on, because life had moved on, and maybe that was for the best. At least, that's what I told myself, because the truth? I wasn't sure I'd ever really forget her. Time moved forward, pulling me with it. University was a whirlwind of new experiences, lectures that lasted too long, friendships that formed over midnight pizza, late-night study sessions where caffeine was my only lifeline. I threw myself into everything, determined to forget. And for a while, it worked. But then there were nights. Nights when I lay in bed staring at the ceiling and my mind wandered back, to the warmth of her touch, to the way she looked at me, like I was something she wasn't supposed to want, to the way my heart had raced every time we were alone. I told myself it didn't matter. I told myself it was just a phase, a moment in time that had already passed. And yet deep down, I knew. I had never felt that way about anyone else. Not before her, not after. Months passed before I saw her again. It was winter break, and I had no choice but to go home. I told myself it would be fine, that whatever I had felt before was long gone, buried under lectures, assignments, and the chaos of university life. But the second I stepped into the house, I knew I had been lying to myself. Anna was there, standing in the kitchen, casually stirring a pot on the stove, looking just as effortless and beautiful as I remembered. For a second, she didn't see me, and in that second, I let myself feel it, the pull, the quiet ache in my chest. Then she turned and our eyes met. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then she smiled, small and careful. "Lisa." I swallowed hard. "Hey." And just like that, I was 17 again, standing in the kitchen, wanting something I wasn't supposed to want. Being home was strange. Everything looked the same, but it didn't feel the same. Maybe because I wasn't the same. My dad was thrilled to have me back, talking nonstop about everything I had missed. Anna, though, she was different. Or maybe it was me. Maybe I was imagining the way her eyes lingered a little too long. The way her fingers brushed against mine when she handed me a plate at dinner. The way her breath hitched the first time we were alone in a room together. Maybe she had moved on. Maybe I was just a ghost of something she had already let go. But then, one night, I caught her looking at me. Not casually, not politely, but the way she used to. The way that made my skin burn. The way that told me I wasn't imagining anything. It happened when my dad was out late with friends. I had been in my room scrolling mindlessly through my phone when I heard a soft knock on my door. I knew who it was before I even turned. Still, when I opened the door and saw her standing there, my stomach flipped. She hesitated for a moment like she wasn't sure what she was doing. Then she stepped inside, closing the door behind her. "Can we talk?" I nodded, though I wasn't sure if I wanted to hear what she had to say. She sat on the edge of my bed, and I sat beside her. Silence stretched between us. Then, finally, "I didn't think you'd come back," she admitted. I frowned. "It's my home." She exhaled, shaking her head. "You know what I mean." I looked down at my hands, unsure of what to say. Because she was right. I hadn't planned on coming back. Not really. I had told myself I was over it. That whatever had happened between us was in the past. But now, sitting next to her, feeling the warmth of her presence, I wasn't so sure. "Did you miss me?" I asked before I could stop myself. Anna stiffened. For a second, she didn't answer. Then, so quietly, I almost didn't hear it. "Yes." My heart pounded. I turned to look at her and she was already watching me. Waiting. Like before. Like always. I swallowed hard. "Anna." She shook her head. "I know." But she didn't move away. And neither did I. The next few days were a blur. I avoided her. Not because I wanted to, but because I was afraid. Afraid of what would happen if we were alone again. Afraid of what I would do if she looked at me that way one more time. But I should have known. Avoidance never worked with us, because one night we found ourselves alone in the living room. The glow of the fireplace casting flickering shadows across the walls. I had been pretending to read. She had been pretending not to watch me. Then suddenly, "I think about you," she said. Just like that. No warning. No hesitation. I set my book down. "What?" Anna licked her lips, her hands gripping the blanket draped over her legs. "I think about you, Lisa." A pause. A beat too long. Then, I never stopped. My breath caught. I didn't know what to say, so I said nothing, and when she reached for my hand, I let her. Her fingers traced slow, deliberate circles on my palm, like she was memorizing me. Like she was afraid this was the last time. Maybe it was. Maybe it wasn't. I should have stopped it. I should have pulled away, but I didn't. That night, with the fire flickering between us, with her fingers tracing soft patterns against my skin, I let myself fall back into it, into her, into everything we had left unspoken. She leaned in, hesitating just enough to give me a chance to stop her. I didn't. When our lips met, it felt like a flood, rushing in, drowning me in something I wasn't sure I wanted to escape, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel lost. I felt found. The next morning, reality came crashing down. I woke up early, the weight of everything settling in my chest like a stone. This couldn't go on. I wasn't a teenager anymore, confused and reckless. This was real life. And in real life, love stories like ours didn't have happy endings. I packed my bags without saying goodbye. By the time Anna woke up, I was already gone. Years passed. Life moved on, just like it always does. I graduated, got a job, moved to another city, and yet, no matter how far I went, I could never quite outrun the past. There were nights I lay awake staring at the ceiling, wondering if she ever thought about me too, if she ever regretted not stopping me that night, if she ever wished things had ended differently. But life doesn't wait for us to figure things out, and neither did she. I didn't see her again until my father's funeral. Standing in the cemetery, surrounded by familiar faces that had become strangers, I felt a hollowness I hadn't expected, and then I saw her. Anna. Older now. Different. but still the same in all the ways that mattered. She caught my eye from across the crowd, and for a moment, it was like no time had passed at all. After the service, as people slowly drifted away, she walked up to me. Neither of us spoke. Then, quietly, "I wasn't sure you'd come." I exhaled shakily. "Of course I did." A pause, then softer. "I'm sorry." She nodded, looking down. Then she smiled, sad and knowing. "You're still beautiful," she said. I let out a quiet laugh, even though nothing about this moment felt funny. "So are you." We stood there, both knowing this was the end of something, the end of what we had been, the end of what we could have been. She reached out, hesitating just for a second, then squeezed my hand gently, not as a lover, not as a secret, but as someone who had once held a piece of my heart and maybe still did. Then she let go, and I let her. Some people leave footprints on our hearts. They don't stay. They don't get the happy ending, but they change us. And maybe, in another life, in another story, we would have gotten it right. But not this time. And that was okay. Because some loves aren't meant to last forever. Some loves are just meant to be remembered, and I would remember her. Always. I left the cemetery with a strange sense of finality. The weight of the past pressing on my chest felt both unbearable and, somehow, lighter than before. I had spent years running from something I never truly wanted to let go. But standing there, feeling the warmth of her hand one last time, I understood. Some things aren't meant to follow us forever. That night, back in my empty apartment, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling. The city outside was alive, restless, but inside my world, it was quiet. I could still feel the ghost of Anna's presence, the echo of her voice, the memory of every moment we had shared. I thought of writing to her, a simple message, "I hope you're okay." Maybe she would reply. Maybe she wouldn't. But instead, I set my phone down and closed my eyes. Because for the first time in years, I wasn't waiting for an answer. I already had it, and it was time to let go. If you like this story, subscribe to this channel. There's a lot more to come.